dos, tres. ¿En español lo hacemos o
Como quieras.
un poquito?
Poquito.
Perfecto, entonces le hacemos. Welcome to Global TV. We are with Gregor from BMW Startup Garage, and he will share how was this smart transportation panel you were sharing at Bits and Pretzel.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share my opinion here. The track was quite interesting because we were discussing mainly about how corporates should cooperate with startups. And so I think some interesting insights came out here. I presented how the BMW Startup Garage interacts with startups. And so I think the novel thing that we are presenting to the startup world is that we are a venture client unit, basically meaning that this is not an accelerator, it's not an incubator, and we're not venture capital. So what is a venture client? This is something that I invented myself basically because I was a startup. Before working at BMW, I spent 12 years creating companies both in Silicon Valley and in Europe. And when I got to BMW, I thought, well, we should work more with startups. And then I asked myself, so what can I offer a startup that the best accelerator on earth cannot offer? So I said, what can I do to make the greatest startup come to BMW instead of going to Y Combinator, right, as a benchmark?
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, what could we do? Well, we could give them 500,000 instead of 125,000, and we could only take 1% instead of 7% and stuff. But then I thought, well, if I was an entrepreneur, I would still go to Y Combinator, and I wouldn't go to a corporate, because a corporate as a shareholder, especially in the early stage, is always an issue. Right? And then I thought, well, what is something that Y Combinator can offer and what we can offer and what startups really need? And what startups really need are clients, right? At the end of the day. So if you don't have clients, you don't have a business.
Sure.
And everything Y Combinator does in terms of that is really helping you access clients, be it through venture capital, be it through good mentoring and coaching and so on. So I said, well, we need to set up a venture client unit, which means we work with startups on a client partnership relationship. And we work with companies that are too young to really be a partner of BMW and who don't have product that's mature enough to be part of the BMW ecosystem. So we said venture client, but that means that we are looking at startups and we don't bring them into a program that takes 4 months and then they do a demo day or whatever. What we do is we look at startups that graduate from accelerators.
Okay, so I need to be graduated.
They need to be graduated from any good accelerator worldwide, or they need to have some professional venture capital. Without that, they wouldn't be able to access our program. And then what we would do, we would find the startups that basically an internal client within BMW for that startup. So let's say your startup has a good sensor for autonomous driving, and your sensor is just better than anything out there in the market. Then we would internally at BMW find the sensor innovation team and say, here's a startup that has a sensor that's better than anything you have. Obviously the sensor department will be very interested, and then we issue a purchase order for that sensor. We give a supplier number to that startup, which is basically the passport into BMW, which is something very hard to get. And the startup would get paid for integrating that sensor in some of our prototypes. So basically they get a supply number, they get a purchase order, so they get money as revenue. And now they can claim that BMW is their client, which helps them in terms of their self-confidence, right? Because now BMW says, BMW is my client, and this means that my sensor is probably good. And it will increase their value because now the investors will say, well, now you got BMW as a client, now your company valuation has increased. So I think the venture client model is really a very good model to integrate startups from the very first day into the corporation and to really give the startup what they need the most, which is the client, and to give us what we need the most, which is great technology.
Innovation. Okay.
Exactly.
So no shares included, basically.
No.
Very good, very interesting. So you say some keywords there, like what kind of startup are you looking? You say sensor for autonomous driving. What are the things like? Will you consider venture clients as startups? Is there any startup in the mobility? Like, what is hot right now for you guys?
Well, hot is definitely autonomous driving and electric mobility. Really the two big areas, and definitely everything that has to do with mobility services. But what we do is we don't go out and look for specific startups. What we say is, all of you guys are great engineers, and all of you guys know mobility, because most of you will have a car, correct? And most of you go from A to B. So think how your technology can solve a mobility issue, and then come to us and say, I have this technology and this is my use case for BMW. And by that, we are very open-minded in terms of what startups can actually add in terms of, for example, we have a startup that has some interesting hardware for engines. And we would have never looked at that, because obviously the hot topic at this point, autonomous driving. This company wouldn't help us solve any autonomous driving issues, but they would help us reduce the CO2 and emission of the car, and on the way save us about $200 million a year in production costs. So we're very open, and we're basically letting the startup define what problems they think they can solve, as opposed to us thinking about our problems. We would like the startups to solve problems that we haven't thought about. This is the biggest power of innovation, because if we know a problem, if you recognize a problem, we have 10,000 engineers who can start working on that. But we would like to solve the problems we didn't think were problems.
Very good. Great. So if you're an innovative startup, you have innovation, and you don't want to give your equity away, and you want a great customer like BMW, so BMW Startup Garage. Thanks, Gregor, for sharing.
Yeah. And maybe one last word. We obviously have a venture capital group too. So if after the Startup Garage program there is an interest and the benefit
fast grower,
to access some of our capital, if there's a mutual benefit, then obviously there is an opportunity to do that too. But it's definitely not an obligation. And also important, we don't take any IP. There's no exclusivity in our program. So the only condition we really say that we need to be the first OEM.
Okay.
So if you already work with another OEM competitor, then you wouldn't go into the garage program. But while you are in the garage program, you're allowed to work with any other OEM.
Perfect.
You're just not allowed to say that you work with BMW, because obviously you're part of the innovation process, and we would like to keep that confidential.
Gregor, thanks so much, and see you in the Startup Garage.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Good.